Let me now address the conduct of a minuscule, reckless faction within our community. At 3:58 p.m., Glasgow did not strain, it fractured. What started as an uneasy afternoon beyond the Clyde transformed in fewer than 60 seconds into the most violent civil upheaval Scotland has witnessed in a generation. Alarms pierced through Argyle Street, reverberating against the damp stone facades as masses pushed like a breathing wave. What was intended as a quiet march for clarity had evolved into something far more dangerous, Britain's new focal point of turmoil. By 4:01 p.m., the initial blaze appeared. A cloud of orange fire consumed the doorway of the Rivergate Hotel, one of the city's biggest asylum facilities. Firefighters subsequently verified it as one of 41 blazes documented across Glasgow in under 6 hours. Hotels, residences, and repurposed refuges all became representations of a government people insisted had exhausted solutions long before it exhausted justifications. Broken glass scattered across the walkway. Bottles sailed through the sky. Police formations fell backward as pro-pro protesters advanced, shouting over the pandemonium. Where is Westminster? On social media, the count of participants exploded. 128,000 individuals flooding George Square, Hall Street, the Kingston Bridge. A city once recognized for resistance now thundered with something bleaker: fatigue, and as the initial emergency bulletins reached London, one reality was already unmistakable. Glasgow wasn't demonstrating anymore. It was exploding. The morning started with a stillness that now seems ominous in retrospect. By 11:22 a.m., Glasgow's city centre was operating at its typical weekday tempo. Office personnel emerging from cafes, buses crawling along Argyle Street, shop signs glowing under pale Scottish daylight. No one yet understood that the document released an hour earlier would destroy the day long before sunset. That document, an internal review from the Home Office, revealed something far worse than a clerical mistake. It confirmed that risk evaluations for 9 extremist suspects had been intentionally altered before reaching the Prime Minister's desk. What had been classified moderate risk in the versions presented to ministers was, according to the original files, severe high-threat close monitoring required. Within minutes, a second leak emerged. This time it identified the official behind the intervention, Starmer's own chief advisor, the one person with both the authority and the political incentive to adjust the numbers. The release instructions, therefore, were not mistakes. They were sanctioned decisions constructed on fabricated data. Once released, the 9 individuals disappeared back into the shadows of the city. The consequences were instant. Before noon, Glasgow. Police recorded 6 knife attacks and 5 arson attempts distributed across Governal, Govern, and 2 incidents along the Clyde. The emergency channel documented 1341 hotels ignite, while riot formations crumble under mass pressure. Distressed calls in the span of 20 minutes. Locals already stretched thin by a year of climbing rent, strained public services, and warnings about overfilled asylum sites interpreted the leaks not as an administrative failure, but as a deception. The phrase manipulated risk files became the spark. The attacks became the fuel. By 10:05 p.m., merchants had closed their shop fronts. Schools sent pupils home early. The city's daytime sky turned murky with smoke columns rising from 3 separate attacks. And across social media, one message surged faster than the fire engines. They lied to us, and we are the ones paying for it. The stage was set. The streets had begun to transform, and Glasgow was preparing to explode. At 3:58 p.m., Glasgow didn't erupt into anger. It detonated. What began as a dispersed march across Hall Street transformed in less than 20 minutes into the largest civil disturbance Scotland has seen in a generation. A wave of bodies, furious, exhausted, unfiltered, surged across George Square, chanting a single line that rolled like thunder between the stone buildings. Where is Westminster? Police radios crackled over the rain as commanders shouted orders no one could hear. Sirens merged into the crowd noise until they were indistinguishable, one long scream stretching across the city center. Bystanders pushed their backs against closed storefronts as thousands pressed forward. fists pounding on riot shields, demanding answers that no minister was willing to give. And then the hotels began to burn. By 4:22 p.m., flames were devouring the upper windows of the Clydeview Residency, one of 41 migrant hotels, targeted across the region. The fire moved unnaturally fast, licking across the brick facade as if fueled by weeks of resentment. Smoke curled over the River Clyde, turning the sky a sickening shade of orange. A firefighter shouted through a megaphone voice cracking, "We cannot hold this perimeter." But the crowd had already overrun the cordon. Bottles sailed across the air. A wheelie bin set ablaze was rolled toward a police van, forcing the officers inside to reverse blindly into the chaos. In the middle of the street, a woman clutching a torn backpack screamed into her phone, "How did it come to this? How did they let it get this far?" Live streams exploded online. Shaky footage of fire, of bodies pushing against police lines, of protesters dragging metal fencing to block emergency vehicles. In only 45 minutes, the clips gained more than 9.66 million views, turning the riot from a local eruption into a national reckoning. But the violence didn't stop at the Clydeview Residency. By 5:11 p.m., arson reports flooded in from Bridgeton, Pollock Shields, and Govern. 19 separate infernos in a single hour. Columns of smoke rose from opposite ends of the city like twin warnings. Footage showed riot officers outside the Glasgow Harbour Grand, their shields slick with rain and ash. One officer stumbled as a glass bottle shattered against his helmet. Another was dragged backward as protesters swarmed the gate, chanting louder with every push, "You promised safety. You delivered silence." For the first time since 2013, Scottish police deployed tear gas. The canister's government alarm escalates as Scotland's crisis reaches major ports, hissed across Buchanan Street, leaving a cold mist that wrapped around the crowd like a physical accusation. Instead of dispersing, the protesters roared, a sound so deep it made the street vibrate. More joined, young, old, exhausted, furious. The number on the streets passed 128,000 before nightfall. Inside a smashed shop window, a TV flickered, replaying the casualty numbers like the ticking of a national clock. 162 injured, 34 police hospitalized, 41 hotels destroyed, £104 million in overnight damage. The numbers didn't calm anyone. They inflamed them. A masked protester climbed on top of an overturned bin and shouted toward the sky, "This isn't protest, this is betrayal." The crowd roared back as if the city itself was answering. Across the Clyde, police drones attempted to track crowd movements, but operators reported interference, jamming signals not seen in a domestic riot since the 2011 disturbances. Officers described it as blindfold policing. They were everywhere and nowhere, all at once. At 5:46 p.m., a viral clip emerged, a police lieutenant kneeling before a line of demonstrators, helmet removed, face strewn with soot. "We serve the people," he said quietly, "not the politics." Those 9 words detonated across the internet, reaching 12 million views before authorities even realized the clip existed. Meanwhile, on the ground, supply routes began to falter. Trucks blocked on the M8, petrol stations overwhelmed. 2 cellular towers in Inverclyde set ablaze, cutting service across entire districts. A leaked internal memo from Police Scotland flashed online just before 6 p.m. Containment no longer viable, public mood unmanageable, awaiting political authorization. The authorization never came. As the sun dipped behind the towers and the city's smoke-stained skyline flickered in red light, one truth became undeniable. Glasgow wasn't witnessing unrest. It was witnessing a reckoning born not of a single night's anger, but of years of silence now collapsing all at once. By early evening, the question wasn't what started the fire, it was whether anyone could still put it out. Inside Whitehall, the air had turned thick enough to choke on. Screens flickered with live feeds from Glasgow, burning hotels, collapsing barricades, streets vibrating with chants that no minister could pretend not to hear. Yet, around the long oak table in the cabinet office, the only sound was the frantic tapping of advisors attempting to rewrite statements that were already obsolete. The first intelligence update landed like a blunt instrument. Sector 12 breached, fire services overwhelmed, police requesting national reinforcement. A junior civil servant read it aloud before realizing his own voice was shaking. Starmer leaned forward. Containment status. A regional commander exhaled sharply. Prime Minister, there is no containment. The crowd outnumbers local units 30-1. For a moment, no one moved. Then panic broke the surface. One advisor demanded a nationwide curfew. Another insisted they declare the crowds organized extremists. A third warned that triggering emergency powers would inflame Scotland beyond repair. Every option sounded like a threat waiting to detonate. A senior Home Office official experts caution the reality. This isn't disorder, it's nationwide mistrust. Attempted a briefing, but her words tangled with the noise of incoming notifications. Images of burning facades, volunteers dragging hoses, riot police retreating under a hail of bottles. Someone whispered, "We've lost the city center." The communications team drafted a 3-line statement blaming isolated criminal activity. Before it even reached the press office, social media drowned it in ridicule. Commentators called it state-level denial. Glasgow MPs called it cowardice. One BBC anchor asked live on air, "How many hotels must burn before ministers call this what it is?" Police chiefs pleaded for rapid authorization to bring in reserve units. The request stalled in political limbo. A cabinet note flashed across the internal chat. Approval pending. Another message followed minutes later. Too late for that now. And by the end of the hour, everyone in the room knew the truth. They could not speak into a microphone. The government wasn't managing the crisis. It was watching it outrun every decision they failed to make. If Glasgow was burning, the rest of Britain was boiling. By sunrise, a wave of disbelief, anger, and exhaustion had swept across the country. Social media feeds turned into rolling news tickers. Every refresh showing new flames, new clashes, new disbelief at the scale of the collapse. And from Inverness to Birmingham, from Cardiff to Leeds, one question rose louder than the smoke spiraling over the Clyde. How did this happen? And why wasn't anyone warned? The answer never came. Instead, the nation watched the street reaction split into two widening fronts. On one side were tens of thousands demanding accountability, furious that migrant contracts, Home Office failures, and leaked internal memos had pushed their communities past breaking point. On the other side were those accusing the government of letting rhetoric and rumors ignite a firestorm no city was prepared to endure. Across social networks, the hashtag #WhereIsWestminster shot past 60 million impressions in less than a day. Clips of riot police kneeling, shaking their heads as protesters pressed forward, flooded every platform. A photo of a mother coughing through the smoke outside the destroyed Argyle Crown Hotel became the image of the day, shared with captions like, "We were promised safety. We got silence." Inside the Commons, the narrative war raged even harder. Opposition MPs held up the burned-out maps of Glasgow's hotel zones. Treasury backbenchers demanded a national emergency vote. A Scottish MP slammed her notes onto the dispatch box and shouted, "You call this contained unrest? My constituency is in ruins." The chamber erupted. The speaker barely restored order. International press called it the Glasgow collapse, Britain's breaking point, Europe's new warning. Meanwhile, Glasgow residents filled George Square again by noon, this time holding signs reading, "We warned you, we're not the villains, we're the aftermath." By mid-afternoon, the truth was impossible to escape. This wasn't protest anymore. This was public judgment delivered in real time to a government that had run out of words and out of excuses. By the time daylight settled over Glasgow's scorched streets, analysts across the UK were already sunrise offers no respite. The question persists, is this a riot or a reckoning? Converging on a sobering conclusion. This was no longer a riot. It was a referendum on trust. A nation that once prided itself on composure had erupted not simply because buildings burned, but because faith in its institutions finally snapped. Security experts warned that what unfolded across Scotland bore the hallmarks not of spontaneous unrest, but of a society that had absorbed too many shocks, too much silence, and too little clarity. One former MY5 coordinator described the scenes as the visible symptom of a much deeper fracture. The public no longer believes the state can keep its promises. Economic briefings painted an equally bleak picture. With access roads blocked and depots threatened, analysts cautioned that Scotland's logistics network could seize within 48 hours if the unrest extended to port corridors. A 48-hour freeze, they noted, would ripple through fuel supply, medical routing, and supermarket chains from Inverness to Carlisle. But behind closed doors, the political analysis was even darker. A senior advisor, speaking anonymously from Whitehall, captured the government's dilemma in a single line. If we call this terrorism, we criminalize half the country. If we don't, we lose control of the other half. It was a truth no minister dared say aloud, because naming the crisis meant owning it. And owning it meant admitting that something fundamental had broken long before the first hotel fell to the fire. Across the networks, commentators repeated a similar warning. This wasn't about migrants, hotels, or even Glasgow. It was about a nation exhausted by uncertainty, a public whose patience had finally been stretched past breaking. In the end, the question analysts posed was not why Glasgow burned, but why it took this long for the flames to appear. By the time morning light crept over Glasgow, the fires had dimmed, but nothing felt extinguished. The smoke hung low over the Clyde, drifting through streets still scarred with shattered glass and the skeletons of burned hotels. Police tape fluttered like frayed nerves. The city was quieter now, not healed, just exhausted. Across Scotland, one question echoed louder than any siren from the night before. How did it come to this? Westminster's latest statement brought no comfort, no clarity, no accountability, just the same measured phrases that had already lost their meaning to millions watching their country unravel in real time. And so the uncertainty grew. If 41 hotels could fall in one night, what falls next? If 128,000 people could flood Glasgow's streets by midday, what happens when the anger spreads beyond Scotland? If trust collapses once, can it ever be rebuilt? The story isn't closing, it's widening. What do you think Britain must confront next? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so this story reaches beyond the silence.